That's so wonderful.
Yeah, this is also streaming live on Facebook and YouTube, and so there will be a digital footprint which others, will be able to also watch in case they're not able. Margaret is in Bangkok right now.
Oh, okay.
I'm at CBA 17, which is focused on community-based adaptation with people like Salim Hook and many others.
Yeah. Actually, Professor Salimul Haq has been one of the champions, advocating for the loss and damage fund from ECAD in Bangladesh.
I think he's on your executive committee, no, for the C20?
That's right, along with Professor Rajiv Shah.
Mm.
But we have not been able to meet because all of them are extremely busy. We're finding also working with multiple time zones also becoming very challenging.
Mm.
And Professor Rajiv Shah, I keep seeing him in, so many locations in different parts of the world all the time.
Yeah, travel has been a bit hectic. Like now, for last 3 years we could not. So now a little bit again started normal travel schedule and.
Yeah, and Margaret is now looking at locally led adaptation in South Asia.
Oh, okay, very nice.
Climate change impact and adaptation concerns in South Asia. So there will be more opportunities to interact and learn from her work and also share some of the good practices. We had actually done, a call for good practice exemplars on many climate change adaptation work by many NGOs, both within India and also from the G20 member countries. And we got a large number of entries, and we shortlisted about 18 of them. And we also have a few videos, small 3-minute videos. So we will share the links with all of you. I think, we hope to put together some kind of a edited volume of some of the good practice examples, climate change adaptation by civil society organizations.
Is Jan joining today or?
Yes, he'll be joining.
Okay, he'll be joining.
Yeah, Dr. Sriram has joined. Dr. Sriram is in Bangalore. You're muted. Dr. Sriram, you're muted.
Good evening, good morning, good afternoon to all. Namaste.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes. Yes, Rajendra, actually, I just started the session. The others have joined. Yeah. No, just do amrita.link, amrita.link/src. No, it'll ask you for a email. You have to just log in with the email, then it'll direct you. Try again. It's on now. Yeah, thanks. That is Rajendra Desai, an architect from right now in the US. He's one person who's done a lot of work with the earthquake affected people in many parts of the country.
I think I got the wrong banner behind me. So if you permit, I can just go back and.
So do you want to have this this one sent across to you? There is another one. Yeah,
there's another one. So just I log out and then try and get the right.
We will send you that link.
Yes, I'll do that. Let me see if I have it already.
Yeah. Dr. Sriram, can you please send the link on the SRC banner?
Sure.
Yeah, I can do that, sir. I'll do that right now.
So that he can actually keep that in the background.
Sure, we'll do that right now.
I'll also send a message to Ian.
Maureen, because she's still not able to connect. I think I'm just sending her the link now.
Yeah, I think many of them found it difficult when the link was not active. It's asking for a meeting ID.
Yes, sir. Shivan had sent another link that Amrita.
Sir, I think that happens when the browser gets cached up. They have to refresh the browser and it will automatically connect you inside.
Oh, okay. I think the same thing happened to Rajiv Shah again.
Right. It should be working now, sir. I have double checked it.
Yeah, Ian, can you try and join again? Yeah. The meeting ID? No, you just have to put in. Okay, I will just send you a message. Yeah, thanks. Sorry, it's asking for a number, it seems. The meeting ID number.
Vinod sir, I'll just send you a message on WhatsApp right now.
Okay. Oh, many people are saying it's saying webinar expired.
But I just sent you a message.
Yeah, I'm just sending it.
Got it.
Yeah, I think Maureen has joined.
Yes, I'm in now. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. Professor Maureen Fordham from the University College London.
Hello, Maureen. Sorry for the inconvenience. We're glad to have you with us.
It's okay. Just switching the video on to say hi.
Great.
Hi.
Hi, good to see you.
And you, Vinod. It's been a long time.
Yeah, it's been a
Hi,
long
Rajiv.
time. Yes. Yeah, Margaret is
Hi,
there.
Margaret.
Good to see you.
And Sudha. Hi, Sudha.
Hi, I'm so excited.
Jan is trying to join, so he'll be joining soon. So
Right.
Dr. Sriram is anchoring this session today.
Vaishak, you are ready with the prayer and the intro video?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. So we'll just give a minute for Dr. Ian to join us and then.
Yeah, he's just joining. He's trying to. Yeah, we are streaming live now, Dr. Sriram. So we can start as soon as you're ready.
Okay, great. So Dr. Ian, should we give him a minute or can we get started?
Yeah, we can start. He will join.
All right. Okay, Vaishak, we can start the recording and then the prayer.
ध्यायामो धवलावगुण्डनवती तेजोमयीं नैष्टिकीं स्निग्धापाङ्कविलोकिनीं भगवतीं मन्दस्मितश्रीमुखी वात्सल्यामृतवर्षिणीं सुमधुरं सङ्गीर्तनालापिनीं श्यामाङ्कीं मधुसिक्तसूक्तिम् अमृतानन्दात्मिकाम् ईश्वरी
India's ancient and rich tradition of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, one earth, one family, is founded upon the inherent oneness of humankind and nature. Yet the unity and balance of the world we live in has diminished due to many complex challenges. Some of the most pressing concerns are the continual rise of carbon emissions resulting in global warming, the rapid growth of the global population resulting in increased greenhouse gas emissions, unsustainable energy use, and deforestation. the acceleration of the climate crisis that is pushing vulnerable and indigenous populations further into the depths of poverty and other economic disparities. Tackling these climate change impacts calls for serious dialogues and deliberations to rightly assess the current state of affairs, gather valuable lessons from the past, and move forward with the right approach. This is more important now than ever, as we are less than a decade away from fulfilling 3 major initiatives centered towards tackling climate change. The Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, and the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development Goals. Shri Mata Amritanandamayi Devi, Chair of the C20, says,
"There is a rhythm to everything in creation, an undeniable relationship between the entire universe and every living creature within it. The universe is like a vast, interconnected network. Suppose there is a net. If it is shaken in one place, the vibration is felt throughout. Similarly, whether we are aware of it or not, all of our actions reverberate throughout creation."
Inspired by this vision, the C20 Working Group on Sustainable and Resilient Communities will showcase the importance of compassionate approaches across key thematic areas such as climate resilience and social justice, environmental sustainability, net zero emission targets, compassion-driven approaches for sustainable and resilient communities. We will work closely with civil society organizations from G20 countries to identify high-impact policy recommendations for implementation. Our working group will engage in dialogues and deliberations to come up with policy recommendations, facilitate events, workshops, and campaigns to showcase efforts by notable international CSOs, collect and review case studies of best practices or udaharans from around the world to raise collective awareness among other activities. We firmly believe that once the decision to help others with compassion is taken, it flows into acts of giving, creating a visual impact of alleviating pain and suffering, thereby creating an atmosphere of unity, harmony, and solidarity. We want to create such impactful visuals of compassion so that the circle of giving keeps expanding until no one in the world is left behind. And we realize India's vision for its G20 presidency, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, one Earth, one family.
Sriram sir, you're muted.
Om Amriteshwari Namaha. My humble salutations to Her Holiness Mata Amritanandamayi Devi, the chair of C20 with the current presidency. Over the last several months, it's been a wonderful journey, a journey where compassion has been the foundation for many wonderful discussions, a journey that's been inspiring, a journey that's been informative, a journey that's been invigorating in all its discussions. Compassion as a foundation. Now, this is not new, and yet we have seen how in some cases it's been acted upon in its full measure, and in some cases perhaps partially, leaving room for improvement. And so one is naturally asked and naturally asks, what could be done for this improvement? What is the effect of falling short? As always, when we look at where we are falling short, I think one very strongly evident element comes out, and that is a decline in solidarity. And we then ask the question in turn, what has caused that decline in solidarity? And so we are all trying to reason through this in a very practical way. And we are trying to look at this sort of a balance between instrumental reason and value rationality. And so if there is adequate importance given to value rationality, I think compassion would naturally flow into action. And I think this has been at the substratum of a lot of discussions in the C20 summits and conferences and symposia this year. When we look at the idea of solidarity and solidarity in action, perhaps in all the social development projects and implementations, whether it's in education or in livelihood and so on, perhaps nowhere does it come as naturally as in the aftermath of disaster. I think people just come together, and we have seen that enough and more in action. But surely we would not wait until then to plan our activities. So there is then three elements perhaps: solidarity in reflection, solidarity in action, solidarity in anticipation. And I think these three have been somehow brought into a lot of the discussions in our C20 symposia on compassion, the sub-theme of compassion, and how that in turn can facilitate a greater level of achievement for sustainable and resilient communities. Against this background, today I take great pleasure in welcoming what I would consider to be a galaxy of star speakers. And I will just very quickly introduce them and then hand over the session to Professor Vinod Menon. Today, we are also very privileged to have Swami Amrita Swarupananda Puri. He will be joining us shortly. And I'll first start with an introduction of Swamiji. Swamiji is the Vice Chairman of Mata Amritanandamayi Mutt and President of Amrita Vishwa Vidyapeetham University. He is the head disciple of renowned humanitarian and spiritual leader, Amma. He has been living in the Amritapuri, Kerala ashram since its inception in the late 1970s. He holds a master's in philosophy and is a renowned author and translator. He has written The Irresistible Attraction of Divinity in 2019, and another book, The Color of the Rainbow, Compassionate Leadership 2014, as well as Amma's biography. He has also translated into English more than 10 volumes of conversations between Amma and devotees, for which he also served as the compiler. He is a magnificent singer and composer of bhajans, devotional songs, and has traveled around the world more than 30 times with Amma in her service. Needless to say, he is more than an authority when it comes to speaking about compassion. So today we are indeed very honored to have Swamiji. He'll be coming at a slightly later stage, and we'll introduce him once again at that time. Today we are privileged to have with us Shri Praveer Krishnaji, IAS retired, is the advisor of Bodo Tribal Council for the government of Assam. And he has held various posts from assistant collector to secretary, GOMP, and Government of India. in which he earned the image of a doer and change maker. He has also served as the managing director of TriFed. He charted a stellar career over the past 34 years, setting new paradigms of empathetic service in all the roles that he essayed. These years also helped him curate his vision for serving people in a manner he knows best, with a blend of thought and action. In his last role as managing director of TriFed, Shri Praveerji engineered the turnaround of TriFed as a major promoter of micro-local enterprises owned wholly by the tribal self-help groups, conceptualized and set up over 50,000 Vandan self-help groups, subsumed into 3,000 Vandan clusters, onboarding more than 9.83 lakh, 983,000 lakh, that's forest dwelling tribals, for value addition and marketing of NTFP and agroforestry related products. Also developed a separate set of over 3,000 clusters of tribal master craftsmen for production and marketing of tribal handlooms and handicrafts, onboarding over 150,000 tribal artisans, formulating this as a national policy for a market-linked livelihood and enterprise development program, which is now taking shape as the Pradhan Mantri Jan Jatiya Vikas Program under the Ministry of Tribal Affairs, Government of India. Shri Praveerji also mooted the idea of tri-food. He is known as a participative and transformational leader with strong team building skills and unique ability to stand with the team. And he shoulders pressure, shares credit, and turns average performers into high achievers. With this said, I now invite Shri Praveerji to share his thoughts and experience and wisdom with us. We eagerly look forward to your address, sir. And then I will hand over the session to Vinodji.
Thank you very much. And it's indeed a privilege and great pleasure in speaking with all of you, and issues which are really close to all of us, close to all our hearts. And I was, when Vinod called me about this subject, I was especially happy because it has a lot of, it has to do with commitment, it has to do with empathy, and it has to do with compassion. So I strongly believe that economic and social development, especially for the marginalized communities, has to be need-based and should have a heart and a soul to it. And when Vinod spoke to me that he's planning a session with compassion as the basis of all things that can be done for these people, I was delighted. And I am sure this strategy for development will deliver better results, as it will empower them, not only empower them socially, but will also empower them financially and facilitate the process of mitigation of natural as well as some of the man-made disasters that we create. We've all been knowing that the vulnerability of the poor and the tribes has been recognized for a long time. Post-independence, and there have been schemes which have been specially devised to do good for them. But I strongly believe that there has been a welfare, the concept of welfare is what we have been looking at, and have been missing out on the enterprise part of it. So the issue of development of any vulnerable section, as also tribes in my case, has two broad approaches: welfare and enterprise. It will be seen that an overwhelming number of government schemes introduced in the past relate to welfare, be it education, healthcare, housing, provision of food, or any other sector. To stress the point, we need to pay attention more on promotion of enterprise, which needs compassion, empathy, and commitment, because this has to do with a lot of risk-taking, which generally government is averse to. So while welfare scheme is a soft option, the enterprise scheme, which has to do with increase in incomes, skills, and rest of the whole gamut of the market chain, has a lot of, may lead a lot of commitment and empathy, as I experienced in my work in the districts of Bastar, Ambikapur, and then now in Assam, the tribal areas of Assam, where I see this component is lacking in most of our efforts that we do, empathy and compassion. Well, the enterprise approach is a felt need. I believe that schemes like promotion of marketing, value addition, branding, and e-commerce and technology will need a lot of commitment and emotion to take it through in areas where they're needed most. While this is a common thing in urban areas and areas which have developed, the far-flung forest areas where these tribals, almost 50% of the tribals reside, almost 5.5 crores in the country, will need something more than just the plan and a program to help them. So like we say, it's to give a hungry man some fish to eat is an option, but to teach him how to catch fish and then to market it in the community is what we are looking at. I'll tell you that, therefore, we must focus on promotion of enterprise without undoing the welfare schemes, focus on enterprises based on locally available resources and traditional skills of the tribes and poor people, focus on value addition to the raw local resources on the principle by the tribes, by the poor, and for the world. Focus on new age market demands like consistency in quality, hygiene, conditions of processing, facilitating packaging in ways that ensure longer shelf life, publicity and advertisement, and preparing the benefits of new age channels of marketing and e-commerce. The appropriate available in the opportunities available in the present times to do the above include certain pro-poor and pro-tribal legislations, which will help them. The Forest Rights Act, for one, the PESA and the FRA Acts, which greatly will facilitate this. So what I will talk about is my experience of a compassion-based development strategy and how this can trigger a multiplier which can add to the incomes of the tribal people. I've had the privilege to work in districts like Bastar, Ambikapur, and now in Assam as a collector and a district magistrate and as an advisor to the government officials and bureaucrats to take things. So what I've found is that these areas have people who have extremely strong skills, like the present state of Assam, the Bodo tribal area. It has about a population of about 7 to 8 lakhs, and about 5 lakhs of them are wonderful weavers. They produce wonderful handlooms and handicrafts, but what they lack is aggregating it and then branding it and then marketing it to get the best prices in the value chain. So what would sell, say, for about 5 to 10,000, they get only about 500 to 600. So what can be done to improve this? So I will tell you how compassion will change things is the case of distribution of cattle. When I was working in Bastar as a district magistrate, there was a program called where cattle was distributed to tribals so that they could sell the byproducts and add to their incomes. And there's also housing and other schemes which was prepared for them. So there was, after some time, about 500 tribals were clustered together, and a scheme was made to give them housing and some cattle and education and other facilities so that they could eke out a living away from the forests. After, say, about some time, when a review was done to see how they have fared after these assets had been distributed, it was found that none of the tribals were living in these houses or were making use of those animals and cattle that were given for them to use. So some introspection was done, and it was found that all of them had gone back to their forests. So the scheme that was devised to help the tribals, in fact, was of no use to them. And when we interacted with them, we found that they had about 100 forest producers which they were trading. And there were about 280 hard bazaars where these things were traded. So it was found that what tamarind, which was a very wild growing and hugely popular forest produce, was selling for about 1 rupee to 2 rupees then in the hard bazaars. And this sold for about 12 to 15 rupees in the secondary market and almost 40 rupees in the tertiary market. So and this was being procured by middlemen from the tribals, when in the whole value chain, the tribal got just say 5 to 10% of the total value chain. We found that salt was being exchanged for these forest producers. Salt was a free good, and these forest producers would be about 10 to 20 times that amount. So the whole scheme of giving them a fair price was set up. There was no MSP for MFP then. And we then got this whole program of providing them with a fair price. 2,400 self-help groups of tribals were set up there. And with support from the Amul model of procurement was followed. And we did about 60 crores of procurement through the 2,400 self-help groups. So what was selling for, say, 2 rupees a kg quickly went up to 12 to 18 rupees a kg. And a little value addition and processing brought the prices to 100 rupees. So the whole system got moved about 5 to 6 times the income. And here, a little intervention, which changed the lives of the entire population of Bastar, and they could earn about 5 to 10 times the livelihood. Similarly, these forest-dwelling people live in very far-off areas, and natural calamities and rainfall at times cuts them off from the local populations, and causing to lots of deaths and plenty of loss of life. So a system was developed where we set up this information system. There was in Ambikapur a time when floods had happened, and all the approach to these areas had been cut off. Diarrhea, there was large-scale spread of diarrhea and waterborne diseases, causing a lot of loss of life. So when we went there and sat with them after a lot of difficulty, we were told that lack of culverts and bridges and lack of a communication to inform about the problem was a problem. So a system was put in place to set up 1,000 culverts in that district of Ambikapur. And over the next 3 years, we could access these areas, and this problem of inaccessibility and leading to avoidable loss of life was taken care of. So what I believe is programs are all well-meaning, but when we take it up and do it with the commitment and the compassion that is needed to take it forward, the results are very different. And we need to really work out such strategies which are not just programs, but programs which are required and which come out from the people themselves. This housing scheme which was made for the people, when we sat with them, they said, no, these are pakka houses and with 10-inch brick walls. They are like furnaces for us. We need those 30, 40-inch mud walls. And if you make these houses, these are no good for us. So when the whole strategy, therefore, I think to sort of development will need to be oriented to take these issues, and then what evolved as the Imli Andolan. We call it so Bastar had about 5,000 to 10,000 tons of tamarind, which fetched very poor prices for the tribals. So we set up a system by which we procured. Tamarind, if you deseed and defiber it, sells for about 5 times the price of fruit, the pulp. And if you make it into pulp, it sells for about 200 to 300 rupees a kg. So from 2 rupees, the journey from 2 rupees to say about 200 to 400 showed that incomes of the tribals could be raised by 5 to 10 times. And it could happen only because we sat with them and we changed the strategy of top-down development to a development from the bottom and what they really needed. So what I would tell this audience, that in areas which are far-flung and which have problems, we need to get into strategies which would during COVID, there are about 100 forest producers which were available, but they had no MSP. So we asked we sat with the government and we announced a minimum support price for these 100 commodities. And what we used to be a 30 crore procurement went up to 3,000 crores and benefited about 50 lakh tribals. So a little concern for the tribals, a little empathy to change things. So what can be done, what initially was thought to be undoable, a journey from rupees 30 crores to 3,000 crores, benefiting almost 50 lakh tribals, could be done by pushing the MSP scheme. And during COVID, when every other means of livelihood was not available to the tribals, this sustained them for over 2 years, where they could really work out great with a lot, not only with sustainable income, but enhanced income. Another skill which the tribals had is of weaving and what you call weaving and preparing wonderful fabric. So what they lack is marketing. So in Assam, what we are trying is to make a cluster of about 300 weavers and then aggregate their products, brand, package, and market them as finished products. So the Bodo silk, which otherwise is sold as individual items, we hope to sell them as finished and final products. So, so it's not just a little program of value addition and marketing, but a program to think the way the tribal thinks and then work it from the other side of the whole compass. And so what we think are gatherers can be converted into producers, and then from producers to entrepreneurs by value addition, branding, and packaging. And I think higher incomes, once they get higher incomes, that is the best insulation against the catastrophes, which at times are natural and which at times are man-made. So a drive to push to increase incomes would be the game changer for these communities. And if we can do such strategies which promote this, because they're wonderfully skilled people, what they lack is this aspect. And if their incomes can be increased along with the welfare program that we run, they are capable of facing the worst disasters as well as we can. So what can be a better way to provide them this safety net of higher incomes and higher standards of living? And this is what will sustain them and to give them the best cover against these catastrophes, which I think should be encouraged and taken up. I have worked on a book, Tryst with the Tribes, which has taken up these journeys of various communities, about 50,000 self-help groups. It tells the stories of about 50,000 self-help groups, how each of them worked out a strategy to aggregate what was available in raw form, and then process it, brand it, market it, and earn about 5 to 10 times the income that they were otherwise earning. Giloi, you will know, is a very important community for immunity development. And during the COVID times, there was a group in Maharashtra which started with a 15 lakh initial capital investment, and which was provided by TriFed. And since Giloi was in great demand, they worked out to brand it as brand it as a tribal giloy coming out from tribal forests and pure in the purest form. And they did business worth about 1.5 crores in about 6 months because there was so much demand for it. So a little assistance when we sat with them, a little to sit in the village and to have trust in their abilities to do the work. And then once they start doing it, the middleman, the nexus of the middleman is eliminated. So the producer, the gatherer becomes the producer. And then if we have the confidence that they can be the entrepreneurs, the marketing people, and the brand creators, they can do wonders. And this little 25-member team from Maharashtra is now supplying almost 2.5 crore worth of giloy to all these big names of Dabur and Jhandu and rest of the Patanjali products. So 50,000 such entities have grown across the country because we had the trust and the faith in them to promote them not as gatherers, not as beneficiaries, but as entrepreneurs. And we asked...
Praveerji,
yes.
Thank you very much. It was actually, very, very encouraging and extremely promising that 5 million tribals have been supported in such a fantastic way, where you have actually moved from $4 million to $400 million.
Yes.
You mentioned 30 crores to 3,000 crores. It is about $4 million to $400 million. And I'm sure that we will actually hear more stories also from Japan, from the UK, from the US, and also from other countries in the region, from our distinguished speakers. And we will actually take up more questions when we have the open house after we listen to the other speakers. Thank you very much for a very, very encouraging and very promising keynote address. Over to you, Dr. Sriram. Please stay on. Please stay on. We will have questions.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Shri Praveerji. That was indeed wonderful. I think the word enterprise, when we look at the origin of it, it says it's something that is undertaken or something that's an undertaking. And so when you initially mentioned in a very innocent way that transition from just welfare to enterprise, it didn't strike me. But then listening to all your narratives, I was just quite blown away. I think so many dimensions have been captured, and the scale at which I think this has been executed is really commendable. Just wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing this. I'm sure it's going to be an inspiration to our audience. Thank you, sir. So we'll be moving on to the other speakers who will get 10 minutes each. And towards the end, Professor Vinod would moderate the question and answers, and we'll field some questions at that time. I'm sure people are brimming with some responses based on what you've just shared, but we'll just hold off on that. Before we move ahead, I also want to first speak a little bit as by way of an introduction of Professor Vinod Menon. So Vinod sir has been kind of the driving force for this whole working group on sustainable and resilient communities. And I mean, I can't overemphasize this. Truly, he's been there. I think he looks very quiet, I think, by demeanor, but in every symposium, in every event, I think he's just been a bundle of energy and also really driving in terms of the wisdom to organize the activities and to pull in the speakers for the events and so on. So it's been wonderful. Just a very little short introduction. So Professor Vinod Menon is the C20 SRC, Sustainable and Resilient Communities Working Group Coordinator. And he's the founder member for the National Disaster Management Authority, NDMA, Government of India, Regional Director, Asia, TIEMS for Oslo and Brussels. And currently, we are also very privileged to have him as adjunct professor in Amrita University and advisor in Amrita School of Sustainable Development in India. So with that said, Vinod sir, warm welcome. And would you like me to introduce the next speaker, or would you do it?
Thank you. You can please carry on. Okay. Introduce Professor Jan Davis.
Okay. So our first speaker today is Professor Ian Davis, and I'd like to first start with introducing him. So, Professor Ian Davis was born in Barrow-in-Furness. I hope I'm pronouncing it right.
You are.
Okay. Ian grew up in a family with a strong international background. He became an architect following studies in London and Atlanta, and worked in various architectural offices in London, Atlanta, Montreal, and Detroit from 1958 to 1971. These included the offices of Erno Goldfinger, Minoru Yamasaki, the designer of the Twin Towers in New York City. Ian's final job before moving into architectural education was as job architect working for Chamberlain Powell and Bonn, the architects of the Barbican Arts Center in the City of London. He then moved into academia to become principal lecturer in Oxford Polytechnic, which is now Oxford Brookes University. This is from 1971 to 1989. Since 1972, Ian's primary academic work has been disaster risk and recovery management as an academic, author, researcher, consultant, NGO board member, and advisor to governments and UN agencies. He wrote the first PhD on disaster shelter in University College London from 1972 to 85. He wrote the first book on shelter after disaster in 1978, coordinated the first UN guidelines on shelter after disaster 1982, and edited the second edition 2016 for the IFRC. He co-authored At Risk, People's Vulnerability to Disasters in 1994, and the second edition in 2004. In 2015, he co-authored Recovery from Disaster. In 1996, he was the first UK citizen to receive the UN Sasakawa Award for his international contribution to disaster prevention. In 2004 and 5, he was part of the working group convened by the British government's chief scientific officer to advise Prime Minister Tony Blair as he hosted the 2007 G7 summit meeting. From 2009 to 12, he was part of the International Working Group on the Independent Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, integrating disaster risk reduction with adaptation to climate change. Currently, he is visiting professor in Kyoto, Lund, Oxford Brookes Universities, and honorary visiting professor at Royal Melbourne University of Technology in Europe. He's been a board member of 4 NGOs, and in 1979 was a founder trustee of Tradecraft, one of UK's first fair trade organizations. He's the author, co-author, or editor of 16 books and over 90 articles on disaster or development-related fields. And his interests include post-disaster shelter, recovery planning, disaster risk reduction, adaptation to climate change, low-cost housing, development planning, architecture, sensory architecture, travel, classical music, painting in watercolor, and church-related activities. Professor Ian, I think it's quite criminal if we have to restrict your talk to 10 minutes, given your vast experience, but unfortunately we are on a timeline here.
I'll do my best.
So thank you very much and hearty welcome.
Thank you very, very much. And thank you everyone for inviting me to take part in this interesting event. It's the first time in my career that I've ever been involved in a discussion about compassion as the mainspring of resilience. And it's very welcome. It's a very welcome subject, and I'm very grateful to whoever thought of it, perhaps you, Vinod. So thank you for that, and thank you for this opportunity to meet some very old friends who I can see their pictures. It's lovely to see you, and delight to take part in this. And I'll keep to my 10 minutes. I think my PowerPoint is being operated from India, so could I see the first slide, please? Perhaps my PowerPoint is not being operated from India. Here we go. Perhaps we could have that on the full screen. That's my topic. How to express compassion when building resilient communities. And I'm just looking back on my career. Next, please. This is not compassion. This is an expression of perhaps concern. After the Turkish earthquake, people are giving soft toys at a football match for the victims of the earthquake. The television coverage in Britain was massive, as it was in all countries, I'm sure, of this colossal earthquake, the worst in Turkey since 1939. And here we see football fans giving soft toys, and the football players are taking them off the pitch and putting them beside the touchline. Now, someone's got to deal with this stuff, and they've got to either send it or dispose of it. And even if they send it, who do they send it to? And who looks after it? There's such a lot of misplaced compassion in disaster risk, particularly in disaster relief. And I want to talk about something a bit more substantial than this kind of outpouring. I think we can always be grateful when people show sympathy, but this kind of thing is people do not know the facts too well when they send this kind of work, which just involves a great deal of work for people and probably doesn't alleviate much suffering. Next, please. If you look up on a dictionary thesaurus, what does the word compassion mean? These are some of the words that pop up. And the first three of them, compassion, concern, and care, are all the names of agencies. There's an American organization called Compassion, a Christian body that deals with sending money to adopted children. Concern is an Irish Christian Catholic Catholic agency, and CARE International is a large United States international body. So three of the names have actually been given to agencies. And as our colleague who's just been saying, empathy and compassion are very similar. So these are just some of the words which describe this interesting process. Next, please. And I've just got two examples of compassion that I want to focus on. One is getting alongside a person or a community in need. I'm not going to read these things because you can read them yourselves. But our last speaker, Pravir Krishna, very kindly told us about the way he did just this. He got alongside people and helped them in their marketing of their handicraft products, something they couldn't do or didn't know how to do. It's becoming a person's kind of extra arm. Next, please. Or another, this is acting for somebody, advocacy. There's a verse in the Bible, in Proverbs, which I will read: speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. For the rights of all who are destitute, speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and needy. If you're without much franchise, if you're without much capacity, you need someone to support you, to speak for you. And advocacy is a form of wonderful compassion. It's a desire to help people and to be their voice. And in this presentation, I decided rather than look at concepts, I'd talk about a few people. Next, please. I want to first talk about somewhere I went to a very long time ago, back in 1986. It was a community living in a squatter settlement beside a very fast-flowing river in Colombia, a place called Ibagué. The river was a magnet for people because it brought down fragments of gold, and people used to prospect for gold in this community. That's why people were attracted to live beside the river. Next, please. Thank you. If you go back one slide, please. Here's this fast-flowing river. The river came down from some mountains, and where they have many thunderstorms, particularly in the rainy season. And the thunderstorms produce a flash flood in the form of a wall of water about 3 to 4 meters high. There is 12 minutes warning for this wall of water because the warning is triggered by the by the river flowing upstream, and they can't get more warning than 12 minutes. So sirens go off. You can just see one or two in the background on a post, and people have to run. Now, many of them are working in the river. You can see some figures in this river. They're prospecting for gold. And so there's a real tension in this community. Next, please. On one occasion, a wall of water came down and destroyed about 12 houses in this little settlement. And the houses have been built by the Lutheran World Federation. That's a big NGO. Now, they should never have built the houses so close to the water. And these were people being evacuated after a volcanic eruption in Armero in 1985. So that was a mistake, but it shows how dangerous this site is. Next, please. You go back one picture, please. The lady on the right-hand side is a shopkeeper, and she showed compassion by doing something about this problem. You can see me as a slightly less old person. 1986, I've still got a ginger beard. It's now gone white. But this lady organized evacuations, and she's called a meeting here of a friend of mine, Gustavo Wiltshires, beside me, and the head of the civil defense, because she wanted some signs to indicate which way to evacuate. Next, please. She organized an evacuation route, how people could get away from the river quickly. She got them up in the middle of the night to practice, and they practiced and practiced. And she found out that one of the problems was that there were elderly people living beside the river. So her first step was to try and persuade those elderly people to swap houses with people who lived up the slope, who were young and more agile. And she succeeded. And so the house swaps took place for about 4 families. And that made all the difference to the evacuation, because these elderly people could not move quickly enough in these fast evacuations that were needed. And that was a good example of just a simple process. Next, please. So all that this project cost absolutely nothing in finance, but it came about because of a compassion of a shopkeeper who wanted to do something for her community, and no external group were involved until she asked for the civil defense to help them put up a few signs. Next, please. So what is the compassion here? Well, very quickly, it's an inspired leader. There's a lot of trust and cooperation by the community. They're also showing compassion on each other. And there was a readiness to make radical changes, such as swapping dwellings. There was a warning system in place to warn, not one, I've got it wrong there, of flash flooding, and there was some cooperation with the government. Next, please. And expressing empathy is very important in compassion. And these are just some of the words: connecting and sharing and understanding. And empathy is really less sentimental. It is certainly seeing things from another person's point of view. Next, please. And this happened in a project that I found really exciting, and one of the best projects I think I've ever seen. After the earthquake in 1993 in Maharashtra, we were part of a team which did an evaluation of it and also advised on the reconstruction. Next, please. Working with our Indian counterparts. It was one of my drawings when I was doing an evaluation of the project. I found doing drawings very effective because people would come along and talk, many of them speaking good English, and they'd stand behind me and they would correct me when I'd done something wrong. But I'd used to ask them who lived in which house and found out all manner of information. Next, please. Now, this was a man who showed compassion. My first one was a shopkeeper, but Laurie Baker was the architect. And he was an Englishman who studied in Birmingham. He married an Indian wife and lived in England, lived in India for all his working life in Kerala, and did wonderful work for the poor, for the urban poor. I love this little quote. He hoped that his buildings would be not known as a Laurie Baker building, but as a Moham Singh's house, where he can live happily with his family. Next, please. And what Laurie Baker did with the design in this Maharashtra one was to say, I don't like these ribbon developments beside the roads. What we will build is a cluster of houses around a courtyard. And the courtyard was not for people to sit out in the evening and enjoy the sunshine or the evening sun. It was where they bought their animals for safety, because their animals were kept on being stolen when they were left in the fields. So the houses surrounded the courtyard, which was where livestock would be bought every night. And he created these clusters which could all expand and grow. And it was a lovely concept, and the public absolutely loved it. And he created the concept because he listened to people, and that was their need. Next, please. And these are some of the houses. And with Mihir Bhatt and my colleagues, we went back 15 years after to see what had happened. And it was very illuminating. Next, please. The houses were all being lived in. A school had been built, a temple, bus routes, sewage, drainage, electricity, and now internet. Next, please. And here was a hero, another one showing empathy, the school teacher, the new school. When I went back after 15 years, one of the big questions was, are the toilets in use? Because when we first went in 1996, nobody was using the toilets in the houses because they went off in the fields for their toilet. And we were divided in our group as to how to deal with this. Our medical people said this is unacceptable. The population's growing. People must use toilets. And but they weren't. They were all being used to store grain. Each toilet was out of use. So when we went back 15 years later, my big question to the village leader was, are the toilets in use? And his reply was, yes, every one of them. Why? Because of the school teacher. She said to the children, the first day they arrived in the school, in the new school, or in their bright new uniforms, every child in this school will use the toilets. And you will go home and you'll teach your parents and sisters and brothers and grandparents and all the people living in your house also to use the toilet in your house. This is a modern society and we use toilets, and we'll teach you how to use them. And that day they were taught how to use the toilets, and they used them from that day. It didn't take 15 years, as the anthropologists in our group had predicted. It took one day, thanks to this teacher. She got alongside the children, and she showed compassion and concern in a very practical way. Next, please. Here they are, a very happy group. It was a great joy to meet them. Next, please. And here's another bit of compassion. The person on the right is called Tommy Swaroop. He's a social worker. He studied with us in Oxford Brookes University, and he directed this project for an organization called Epicor. The whole team he assembled lived in the villages, and they worked with communities. And he got to know this man here, and his family. And they had a daughter. Sorry, this was his future son-in-law. The father is not here. And they had a daughter, and she's here with a sari. And towards the end of the project, Tommy said to the village, would you like to travel somewhere else in India to see India? You've never been anywhere, have you? And we would like to help you. And they said, we'd love to, but we haven't got the money. He said, no, we'll cover the cost. So they brought in about 5 minibuses, and they filled them up with people and took them up to Delhi, where they met their member of parliament and saw the Taj Mahal. And as we wandered around the village, this little girl here, who was 5 years old then, she's now grown up and married, this is her son, she had postcards on the wall showing that trip, and she was overjoyed to see Tommy and the team again, because she hadn't seen us for 15 years. It was like a family to them. So he showed great compassion to help open the eyes of the village and to help them. And it was great respect, because Tommy came from a Christian organization, but they were working with a Hindu community, and there was no attempt whatsoever to change the way they behaved or their religious faith. It was just an acceptance and working alongside them. Next, please. So I won't go into all these factors. In fact, our time is short, so I'll skip that. Next, please. But in this little short presentation, I just want to summarize some of the. We've just met a few people. We met an aid worker who listened and understood the community's needs, and he took them on a trip to Delhi and everything. The first one, though, was a school teacher. She listened and understood. And Laurie Baker challenged the orthodoxy of straight rows of housing, and he rethought it because that's what the community required. And all of these people believed in local initiatives, no handouts, no paternalism, build relationships and establish trust. And I think some of the best compassion comes from those kind of roots. And with that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Ian. That was indeed wonderful. I think the set of best practices or udaharans, as we call them in the C20 language, I think there are so many that we'd love to include in our database, and we hope that we can reach out to you and gain from including those. Thank you so much. And it was lovely to see these examples of translation of the inner values of compassion to transformation from the individual to the social levels. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I just want to, introduce a very special person. We have Sampujya Swamiji, Swami Amrita Swarupanandapuri, and I'm very privileged and honored to share a brief introduction about him. And then I would request humbly for Swamiji to address the gathering. So I'll first share a brief introduction of Swamiji.
Dr. Sriram, since already introduced Swamiji, and
okay, then we
could request Swamiji to kindly initiate his presidential address.
Okay. Swamiji, we had shared the brief introduction earlier, so I request you to kindly address the
Okay, no problem. I humbly bow down at Amma's lotus feet. My namaskarams, love and greetings to Sri Pravir Krishna AS, Professor Ian Robert Davis, Professor Rajiv Shaw, Miss Margaret Arnold, Professor Maureen Fotham, Dr. Sudha, and Mr. Vinod Menon. Disaster management, SDGs, net zero targets, climate change, etc., are the hottest topics in today's world. All over the world, there will be hundreds of even thousands of scientific and technological conferences, implementation of laws, constitutional amendments, recommendations by experts, suggestions by NGOs, and remedial measures by governments, organizations, groups, and individuals taking place daily. The internet is flooded with tons of information and approaches. It appears that, this is just a personal opinion, it appears that everyone is confused about an effective approach acceptable to everyone, regardless of nationality, language, culture, and religious faith. Personally, the confusion, I think, is real, because when you try to evaluate and come up with solutions to a fatal situation such as the current one, only from a rational and scientific point of view, the results are bound to be defective and weak. When a situation is only man-made, which certainly plays a major role in the challenges we are facing right now, our intellectual and scientific calculations work to a certain extent. However, here, in the present condition, whether it is disasters, man-made or natural, or climate change, SDGs, whatever, an irresistible and uncontainable power, nature, is involved. Somewhere in the corner of our minds, we human beings, out of our sheer ignorance, believe that we can conquer nature. This is arrogance. The mystery aspect must be accepted while continuing our efforts to tackle the situation using science and technology. Let's also try dropping our egos, at least to some degree, and befriend nature. Let us try to develop a companionship attitude with the nature. Let's be servants of nature instead of trying to be bossy. Let us not try to impose our rules on nature. And most importantly, let's learn to be compassionate towards nature. The thing is, from both an objective and subjective point of view, nothing is free. Nothing is free in this world. There is a price for everything. For every single thing that we take. If we are taking something, we must give back. So when we occupy nature's space, the earth, when we take nature's air, water, fire, and more than enough natural resources from her, how can we expect to get everything free? I'm reminded of Albert Einstein's famous saying, two things are infinite, the universe and human stupidity. And I'm not sure about the universe. Amma Sri Mata Amritanandamayi Devi, my spiritual master, mentor, and guiding light, says, we are made up of the same fundamental fabric as nature. The world is constituted of earth, air, fire, water, and space. Our bodies are also of the same 5 elements. So we are one with nature, not separate at all. In reality, the world is not outside as we think. It is within us, and we are inside of it. When we refer to our bodies, we are referring to nature and vice versa. In short, there is no such thing as outside and inside. It is a whole. I unquote. So when we are trying to take care of natural disasters or man-made disasters, we have to consider nature first. And when we consider nature, it is not something else that something outside we are taking care of. We are taking care of ourselves. Because nature is nothing but an extension of our own body. So we should take care of nature just as we take care of our own body, our own life. We are good in coining new phrases and names. Climate change, global warming, disasters, various natural and man-made disasters, pandemics, etc., etc., etc. The names are useful for communication purposes. These threatening issues, though named differently, are interconnected. I mean, the root cause is one, and that's human greed. Greed creates imbalance. So only if you bring down our greed, only if we come out of the cocoon of greed, the narrow-minded world we created, the smaller worlds, will we be able to bring down the intensity of these natural disasters. And remember, none of the natural disasters are created by nature. Most of them are man-made. And what is the source? The real cause. The real cause is within us, not outside there, as we think. So all solutions, recommendations, and efforts will be incomplete unless we make the necessary corrections here, within us. The scripture, the famous scripture, Bhagavad Gita, says, a person who repeatedly takes from the totality but never contributes to it is a thief. I'm not trying to be pessimistic I want to be optimistic and contribute as much as I can to create a better world. In fact, our NGO, especially Amma's whole life and her actions, are based fully on giving. Mr. Ian Robert Davis was talking about Lathur earthquake. I would like to mention that our organization adopted 3 villages, Motsar, Mukhana, and Dagara, located far away from the highways, about 40 kilometers from the Pakistan border, after the 2001 Bhuj earthquake, Gujarat earthquake. Our organization not only rebuilt 1,200 houses, but also schools, community halls, water tanks, medical clinics, and roads, as well as providing electricity and sewage systems. So a transformation is possible. And you know what happened? These villagers, when the tsunami took place at the coastal village where our organization is, where the headquarters of our organization is situated, these villages, hundreds of these villages came to help us here in this village. And when asked, they said to the reporters, when we were in trouble, when we were miserable, when we lost everything, Amma's organization helped us. Now, this is an opportunity for us to give back. So, and a transformation is possible, but it has to be a virtuous circle instead of a vicious circle. However, the path is not easy. It's most difficult and the goal is too far away. We are aware of the impressive 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The momentum for setting the goal of net zero targets is growing fast. With Bhutan, the first country to commit to a net zero target in 2015, over 90 countries, including India, representing nearly 80% of global emissions, have so far covered by a net zero target. I was wondering why there wasn't any remark on the aspect of compassion in the notable 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. 90 countries have committed to a net zero target ranging from 2030 to 2070. It's a good sign, of course, although it is a little too ambitious to imagine that all the countries would achieve zero target balancing. Here, what we don't consider is, what is the guarantee that our world will exist for another 20-25 years? Hopefully, some of the Scandinavian countries may come close to the target. In spite of the enormous efforts for balancing out the fatal situation, progress is happening far too slowly for the world to hold the temperature rise to 1.5 degrees centigrade. That is 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit. And what does the UN say? They say that with all the climate policies in place right now, still there will be a rise of 2.8 degrees centigrade temperature by the end of the century. The goals we are trying to achieve will either be temporary or unrewarding if each one of us is reluctant to give up some of our short-term conveniences, our extreme craving to increase our physical comforts, and our self-centered and inconsiderate attitudes. To be a little too blunt, human beings have only 2 choices left with them. We can either choose our habitual defensive mechanism trying to protect our interests as individuals, families, communities, nations, religions, and so forth. This will make life on Earth miserable and take the life of the entire human species on Earth. The other option is to accept common values for the common good and work towards achieving them. What is this compassion we are talking about? It is a greater level of understanding and accepting people and situations as they are with all their limitations and weaknesses. Inadequacy inadequacies and fragilities are common. We cannot attribute them only to certain groups, communities, cultures, and nations. They are applicable to everyone. There is no dignity in excluding ourselves while pointing fingers at others. The attitude should be, what has happened to them can happen to me also. This kind of understanding is internal, not external. And this type of understanding will transform itself into compassion. Most importantly, compassion is an inherent quality. It's not something that needs to be searched outside. It's within us as our own nature. Recently, I was having a conversation with someone. The man shared an incident that took place while he was on his way to our NGO headquarters. While on the road, he inadvertently rear-ended an expensive car in front of him. Even though the damage seemed to be minor, the man immediately went and apologized to the man in the car. The man whose car had been hit came out and looked at the scratch on the bumper and smilingly replied, "No worries. Just one of those days. It happens to everyone." And he left. This is understanding. This is compassion, even though it was temporary. Expanding this space of compassion within each one of us is the need of the hour. So compassion is the finest understanding that can dawn on anyone in this world. So while brainstorming on the scientific and technological solutions to slow down and minimize natural and man-made disasters and other fatalities that stare at humanity, let us also try compassion, the most natural and readily available and time-tested sure way to ultimate success. Let me conclude with the saying of Amma. If we approach nature with humility and love, it will serve us as our best friend, a true friend that would never let us down. Thank you so much. Om Amriteshwariye Namaha.
Thank you so much, Swamiji. I'm sure that these wake-up calls have been taken to heart by our participants in several ways. One, in understanding our individual responsibilities and understanding that it begins inside each of us, and then translating the values into creating the virtuous circle and paying it forward, creating that chain or link of goodness. I'm sure all these would be considered and reflected upon deeply in our policy deliberations. Thank you, Swamiji.
I just wanted to mention that Swamiji was attending the International Advisory Committee meeting, and he has come out of that meeting to join us for this presidential address. I want to thank Swamiji on behalf of all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Sriram, over to you.
I now have the pleasure of introducing the next speaker, Professor Rajiv Shaw. I'm going to keep it very brief. I'll post more detailed biodata on the chat window. Professor Rajiv Shaw is a professor in Graduate School of Media and Governance in Keio University in Japan. He's also a distinguished professor in the Institute of Disaster Management and Reconstruction of Sichuan University and Indian Institute of Technology, Guwahati. He did his studies in Yokohama National University and Osaka City University in Japan and University of Allahabad and Burdwan University. I would like to first highlight some awards. He's got over 65 books and more than 400 research papers in the field of environment, disaster management, and climate change. He's received the Pravasi Bharatiya Samman Award in 2021 for the contribution to the education sector. He's also received the United Nations Sasakawa Award in 2022 for his lifetime contributions in the field of disaster risk reduction. So with this, I invite Professor Rajiv to kindly deliver his address.
Thank you very much and namaskar. I'm sorry I have a little bit broken voice, catch a cold, and sorry, please bear with this very bad voice. My sincere thanks and appreciation to the organizers for inviting me to this very important event. And as Ian also pointed out in his presentation, that at least those who are working on the disaster risk reduction, we have not been familiarized with this particular word, compassion-based disaster risk reduction. But so when I first heard this particular topic, again, thanks to Professor Vinod Menon for inviting me on this very important event. So I was thinking that how I can reflect some of these issues which we have been doing, especially on this compassion-based disaster risk reduction. I must say that whatever I'm going to say is not only a fruit of my academic career, but also what you are seeing here on the screen, some of my work with the science policy interface, some of the work which I do with the youth group, mainly on the startup and innovation, and more importantly, with the community-based organization, non-profit organizations, and NGOs. To me, when I was trying to see a little bit or think about this compassion-based approach, I think these 5 points are very important, which links to some of our work on disaster risk reduction. This is the key to community-based disaster risk reduction. This is the code to the communities, and these are possibly the code to the change agent. It is the building block of the human security concept. I will come back to all these 5 elements later. In Japan, we call these 4 types of help: self-help, mutual help, public help, and network help. Again, compassion is core to all those 5, all these 4 helps. Compassion also enhances us to do the volunteer activity in disaster risk reduction. And I will come back to another new concept, which is we call the Society 5.0, which is a technology-driven, people-centric society, and how in this futuristic society, compassion can also play a very important role. I love showing this particular photo when I explain community. This photograph what you are seeing on the left top. This is a photo from a small rural area. It's an UNESCO heritage site called Shirakawa-go. What you are seeing here, all the houses are very traditional houses, and they have this thatched roof, which are usually replaced once in around 30, 35 years. And what you are seeing here, the people who are helping, they are not the outsider people. They have not paid. They are all the local community member. So I think this compassion for helping each other in the time of the need is the binding factor of the community. So it's very difficult to show in one photograph as a community, what is community. But to me, I think this particular photograph is a very classic example of that it is the concept of commonness, it is the concept of mutual assistance, and it is the concept of trust and social norms. With my little experience working in different parts of Asia, these are some of the photographs what you are seeing here on the right-hand side, the examples. On the top left is the photograph from Afghanistan, which I took back in 2002. That was the initial phase of the Taliban collapse. And, like Taliban could possibly destroy the whole country on the infrastructure, but it could not destroy this very traditional Surah system, which is the community-based system which exists there over 500-600 years. The same thing in Nepal, what you are seeing in the second photo, that is we call the Guti, that is the Newari tradition in Nepal. Even in Kathmandu, those who have been, that still this type of common place becomes very, very important for the urban area. For compassion-based, I think the leadership or the change agent becomes also very important. What you are seeing here on the bottom left photo is what we call the SK, Sangguniang Kabantan, which is the youth council in Philippines. And they play a very, very vital role in binding the different communities. Then we have Muhammadiyah, which is the faith-based group in Indonesia. Again, their role in bringing the communities together is very important. Farmers Association in Vietnam, and the photo right bottom is the Mothers Club in Bangladesh. So even the local culture, customs are different, even the language is different. I think there is one commonness here, which is the compassion and the community. The human security dimension, this is one of my favorite actually book or report, I will say. It's almost 20 years old, but still it is very, very relevant. When this whole concept of the human security came, there was a Human Security Commission, which was established by United Nations. And it was that time chaired by Sadako Ogata, who was the president of JICA at that time, and Amartya Sen, the prominent Nobel laureate. And I think they mentioned in this very specific document that at the center of sustainable development is the delicate balance between human security and environment. From our previous speaker, from Swamiji, what we heard is actually reflect the same thing. And again, it also, I just highlighted a couple of points. I'm not going to read the whole text here, but I think there are always little concrete actions at the local level to ensure participation of affected community and people. So how we actually enhance the community, how we enhance their participation, that's a very, very important thing. And recently with this global pandemic, myself and one of my colleagues from Indian Institute of Science, we recently did this particular book on global pandemic and human security. And I think we have never faced this type of major challenge to re-understand the importance of compassion through all different parts of our lives. Self-help, mutual help, public help, and network help. These are the photographs from Japan, from East Japan earthquake and tsunami. The photo which you are seeing here on the right-hand side, right up, these are the two schools, which is in Kamaishi. It's in Iwate Prefecture in Japan. So you can see that the schools are very close to the coastal area. Both of them were destroyed, but all the students actually, they evacuated to the higher ground and they were safe. But this particular information to evacuate them to the higher ground, because the usual, in Japan, the system is that you go to the top floor of the building. But here, the local volunteer, community volunteer actually, who gave this very critical information about the tsunami height, because it was all in the panic situation, that actually saved the life of around 140 people. That again shows that school as the vital social infrastructure in the community, and how the compassion of the people actually helps them. The lower one, our own work in Miyagi Prefecture in Kesenuma, where there were this temporary shelter. And many people actually, they live in the temporary shelter for longer time of period with different types of grief. So we found that this type of food hot bath, what you are seeing here on the right-hand side photograph, that really helps the people to actually ease some of the griefs, and then they have started talking a little bit, because this is a sort of very important way of psychosocial care. And we have actually a trained volunteers who try to get different types of information and then give input to the local government. So my own understanding or learning of this, earlier we used to talk about self-help, mutual help, public help, but I think this network becomes very, very important. Network of communities and network inside and outside the community. The disaster voluntarism, it's possibly one of the core of the passion. After every disasters in India, in Japan, globally, we have seen many different volunteers who help in the different aspects of the immediate, short-term, medium-term, and long-term recovery. We often call the 1995 as the year zero of the disaster voluntarism in Japan. And we have seen that how this whole voluntarism system has evolved, how this, we have seen that when we had typhoon, flooding, earthquake during the prolonged period of COVID-19, then again, the new types of voluntarism, new types of compassionate leaders, especially from the students in the local schools, that also emerged very strongly. There are lots of invisible voluntarism. Nowadays, we also, like many people who are good in the IT, who they actually helps in different types of information, providing different types of information technology. That's not a very visible volunteerism to go to the field. They are always in front of the screen, but their information also becomes very, very important. Why they are doing it? Again, it's out of this compassion to help people during the time of their need. I wanted to introduce this concept of Society 5.0, which we are now currently working on in Japan. Why 5.0 is, if you see, 1.0 was the hunting age, 2.0 was the industrial revolution, 2.0 was the agriculture revolution, 3.0 was the industry, 4.0 is the current one, which is the information revolution, and 5.0 is the place where possibly we will be going in future. It's a futuristic society. Many times we possibly have to depend on technology. In Japan, due to different types of demographic changes, whether it is the depopulation, aging population, we have to depend on AI, we have to depend on robotics, we have to depend on drone, different types of emerging technology. But the most important thing is that we should not forget that why the technology is, because it has to be people-centric. There is a need, there is a challenge, there is a problem. So it has to be more inclusive. Technology should not just serve the people with the younger generation or who are so-called the technology native, but we also need to incorporate the old population, the physically, mentally challenged population, and so on. We recently did a book on this, try to emphasize on this very much people dimension of the Society 5.0, digital transformation and disasters. Again, there I see a very strong role of compassion. Possibly it's a new concept of compassion. Possibly it's a new form of compassion in this new society. But that's also very, very important to understand. That's my last slide. My presentation usually don't end if I don't emphasize on the importance of the youth and the role of youth in disaster risk reduction. You know that I strongly, with my 25 plus years career in the disaster risk reduction, I think the role of youth have become more important. How we actually engage the compassionate youth in the disaster risk reduction, that becomes more important. How we actually engage them into different types of social innovation, that becomes more important, and to develop this entrepreneurship skill. Some of you may have heard the term called Generation Z, who were born, this new generation who were born after 1996. They were what we call the digital native. They have been born with the smartphone in hand. So it's possibly a totally different new generations we are talking about. But that having a smartphone does not prohibit them to be compassionate. I think our role is to provide a platform to them to challenge their innovation, or where they can actually confront with their new ideas. And the science-based social innovation is very, very important to me. With that, I think that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your kind listening.
Professor Rajiv Shah, arigato gozaimasu. Thank you so much. I'm sure that even here, our team would love to reach out to you and dig into some of those wonderful examples that you presented, because we have the Udaharans database that we are trying to populate. And I hope it's okay for us to reach out to you to take some of those notes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Look forward.
Thank you. We now move on to the next speaker, and I take pleasure in presenting to you Professor Maureen Fordham. Maureen has been researching disasters since 1988 and is an expert on community-based disaster risk reduction and vulnerability analysis, focusing on the inclusion of a range of marginalized social groups in disaster risk reduction, especially women and girls. She was a founding member of the Gender and Disaster Network in 1997 and is the coordinator of its website and activities. She's been a governmental advisor at all scales, from local through national to the global UN level. She was closely involved in negotiations which led to the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015 to 30. She was a facilitator and researcher involved with developing a gender-responsive national resilience program for Bangladesh, launched in August 2017, together with the government of Bangladesh, the United Nations Development Program, United Nations Women, and the United Nations Office for Project Services. With this, Professor Mori, over to you.
Thank you. And I think you are going to advance my slides.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for the introduction. Thank you for the invitation. And I must say, with this group of speakers and hearing about everyone's wonderful contributions, it's activated my imposter syndrome immediately. But let's go forward. So the first slide, please.
Yes. Just getting in there.
While it's being loaded, I'll just tell you something about the presentation. So it's entitled Compassion and Care, Feminist Approaches from the GRIP Project. And the GRIP Project is a large UK Research Council funded project that we're working on at University College London now. Would you like me to share my screen?
Is it not seen now? Oh.
I can see myself, but I can't see.
Not yet. Not yet.
Oh, okay. 1 second.
Yeah, it's coming up.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes,
yeah,
that's
full screen, please. Yes.
Thank you. So this is the project. Everything I'm going to talk about, you can find on the website for the project. So the link is there, the bottom left of the screen, grip.net. And this stands for Gender Responsive Resilience and Intersectionality in Policy and Practice. And it's the best and most demanding project I've ever worked on. Next slide, please. And so what I thought I'd talk about is the word we tend to use in the project is around care, and this has come up again already. We use care, but you can see in the definitions, there are very close comparisons between the two. So I'll say something about the project, what GRIP is all about, and the way we approach this very innovative project, and give you some examples of the work that, when I say we have been doing, we, the academics, we're the facilitators. But it's not us really who's doing the work. We are supporting people through awarding them funds to do their own projects and activities. And then I'll just say what is behind it, the GRIP's theory of change. Next slide, and then move to the next one immediately. So what GRIP is all about. So we have partners in 3 world regions, in Africa, Latin America and Caribbean, and South Asia. And it's a Network Plus project. So its aim is to build a network of networks, linking existing ones, but building new ones. And we work with all sorts of people. with scholars and policymakers, with practitioners, and with a whole range of grassroots groups. And we're trying to work across theory, policy, and practice. And we use resilience as our umbrella term because when we set out the proposal to do this that we sent to the funder, we didn't say exactly what we would be doing, because our idea was that the ideas for what activities took place would come from the regions themselves, by the regions themselves reaching out through their networks, new networks, and commissioning projects that the region itself wanted to do, not us from the UK saying what would be a good idea. So it's very much about this connection, and we also try and practice what we preach. So we try and put into practice care-based approaches, and it means caring for each other, caring for the environment, caring for those around us. That's the important part of what we do. If I could see the next slide, please. Just to give you an idea, when we recently had a series of meetings in London where our awardees from across those regions came to visit us, and we asked them to describe, in one word, what GRIP meant. And these were just some of the words that came up. It's very much about connection. They very much spoke about opportunity and really appreciated the flexibility of the program. It's not really a project, it's more of a program. And its uniqueness, but also the diversity, because these are very diverse groups coming together. And I can't tell you how rewarding and enriching it's been when we've managed, after the worst of COVID lockdown was over, to finally come together and meet face to face. Next slide, please. So yes, it's very much about how we do things as much as it is about what we do. And we set out to be feminist and decolonial. Next slide, please. So we're trying to find innovative ways of working. As again, it's not just what we do, but how we do it. We lead in a feminist way. We didn't set out a set of rules and said, this is what feminism is and a feminist way, but it was essentially some core values that we shared. And it places a duty of care on all of us to look after each other and the people we work with. And we're guided very strongly by this decolonial approach, by which we mean we're trying to unpick the kind of power relationships that have been dominant and to give as much autonomy as we can to the regions and the communities and the groups themselves that we work with. And we do this in the management team here at UCL, University College London, where we have the Centre for Gender and Disaster, which is flat. It's a horizontal management structure where we make our decisions collectively. And I won't have time to go into all of the examples that I give in detail, but you can get a copy of the presentation and you can look for those examples afterwards, and you can find them on the website. Next slide, please. So just some examples. Next slide, please. One of the, oh, that's strange. Okay, I think we're beginning to see it now. Yes.
Yeah.
So one of the most impactful examples we could share is the work that's been done with some of our awardees in the Amazon. And this was a very different one where the Institute of Women of the Amazon were interested to get some training because they wanted access to funding and they didn't have the background, they didn't have the infrastructure. And so a couple of our colleagues went to the Amazon and developed a training for them. And this was in project management and teaching them how to use finance tools and Excel spreadsheets. And one of the team that went was not one of the researchers, one of the academics, but was one of our professional services team, our finance manager on GRIP. So this was very different again in how we do things, because we were bringing the so-called backroom people, the people who are never acknowledged, the professional services or administrators, right into the heart of the project itself. And you can watch a very short video there from Panani Yawana speaking about what she got out of that training. And also another example, again from Brazil, where we did something different again, where we were supporting the extension of a spiritual house. So it's very much about connecting people to each other and to the environment, and developing a traditional kitchen on Suruku land, so people can cook together. Next slide, please. And we also tried to develop non-standard written output. So it's a research project, it's funded by the research councils, but we tried also to find different ways of producing materials. So there's a lexicon where all of the team members in GRIP were asked, do you want to just write something very briefly about one of the terms that we use? And it can come from a very personal view. That all of this is online. You can just, and the links are at the bottom of the screen. You can go to all of those. You can look online or download the lexicon. We also have the Feminism in the City e-magazine, and you see a few of the pages in there. Again, people are giving very personal accounts which fit totally within the ethic that we work in. And we're currently developing a reference guide. It's like an annotated bibliography. We have a series of them, but it's focusing on LGBTQIA+ communities and looking for as many resources as we can find that are out there to introduce people to this. Next slide, please. There's a little bit more there on the Quilombo de Cachuca partners. Next slide, please. And they have a festival. They're acknowledging the faith, gender, culture, territories of Afro-descendant and indigenous people. And this is the contribution of the project, where it was helping them develop this sacred space. So what we're trying to do are rather different things, but it's what the need has been, how the need has been expressed from the regions themselves. Over on the right, I won't go into all of this, but again, this is Hui Mitzi and Nadia Jackson. So two of our finance team from the GRIP project who went on a personal development course. But it's, as Hui says, I felt like a valuable member of the GRIP UCL team from day one. that's really what we're all about, that people should feel like that in the project. Next slide, please. I know we don't have time for everything, and we have other people we want to hear from as well, so I won't spend too much time on this, but something about how we theorized what we were trying to do. Next slide, please. Our theory of change was very much around changes, wanting to make changes in narratives, in the dominant thinking, in structures that can be so limiting for so many different groups, and in skills. And as I said before, we're trying to do this in terms of changes and developments in theory, policy, and practice, with gender and intersectionality at its heart. Next slide, please. And so what changed? Next, if you just click again, the next piece will come up. We wanted to make this change in skills. It doesn't seem to be coming up. One click, please.
Can you just click once again? Click.
Yes, please. That's it. Yeah,
Once.
there we go.
Once.
Yeah. So, and that's right. And then there's one more on that slide.
Great.
So changes in skills. So we think we've made a difference here. As I said, we have grassroots women in Brazil learning basic project management. And they did manage actually to put in a proposal and get some funding and some other benefits. Changes in narratives. We don't have this specific GRIP narrative. You know, this is the GRIP narrative because we are such a diverse group. It's very different. So we haven't sought to impose that on people. But in Bangladesh, for example, there's been interest at ministerial level in exploring intersectional approaches to gender and what does that mean. Changes in structures, that of course is the major challenge. We've found resistance by the funder and by universities in all regions to adapt their processes and devolve more autonomy to the regions. And in fact, you know, right at the start, Pravia mentioned risk-taking and the way governments are very averse to this. And that's certainly the case we have found, that although there is spoken support for the kind of work we're doing, when it comes down to transferring money, then people are very risk averse. And we have endless battles every day in trying to make that happen as smoothly as possible. Next slide, please. And that's my last real slide. So what we found, and we're coming to the end of the project now, and we're still absorbing what's been done and trying to think what we've achieved. But what we found is there's really an inverse relationship between these different change levels and the impact we can have. So we found that, you know, there's greater impact achievable at this individual level. We've heard from so many people involved with GRIP that they've gained and shared new knowledge. We think we've also managed to provide resources to different social group representatives in our various regions. We've received excellent feedback in this broader, you know, societal frame from institutions for the kind of ideas and the work we've generated. But there's little evidence yet of real structural change. And that point I just made about, you know, the resistance to very freely transferring money around the world. There's a lot of aversion to opening up that far and doing that. So there's a trust issue that we find that we haven't managed. That's a problem we haven't managed to crack yet. So next slide is really the last slide, and it's just to say thank you, and happy to take any questions if there are any later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Maureen. So I think since we are a little bit delayed, I'll just move ahead to the next speaker, and then we'll take a few minutes at the end for some question and answers, and Professor Vinod will moderate that part as well. So thank you again. One of the points that I really wanted to expand upon, I hope we can work with you on this, is the impact assessment, not just into the project, but also midway and during the course of the implementation as well. In fact, this is something that specifically speakers that we had in C20 from indigenous communities, they specifically had this concern. They wanted to have this kind of an impact assessment. So that's something that we'd love to work with you on. Thank you. The next speaker is Ms. Margaret Arnold. I take great pleasure in introducing her. Before I proceed, Margaret, thank you for your patience. I know that it's gone past what we had projected earlier, but I'll just take a couple of minutes to introduce you. So Margaret is a senior social development specialist leading work on the social dimensions of climate change for the bank's South Asia region. She's in World Bank's global lead on social dimensions of climate change. She has been with the World Bank since 1995 and was part of a 2% team that established the World Bank's first unit focused on disaster risk management in 1998. She is credited with facilitating the bank's recognition of disaster risk reduction as a development priority. She's one of the founders of the Provention Consortium, an innovative partnership program of humanitarian and development actors aimed at integrating disaster and climate risk management concerns into development work. From 2007 to 2009, Margaret served as Provention's head of secretariat through a secondment to the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. Upon her return to the bank, she helped to shape the bank's agenda on the social dimensions of climate change. For the past 4 years, Margaret has served as the bank's global lead on the social dimensions of climate change, during which time she has led work on social resilience, just transition for all, and locally led climate action. With this said, Margaret, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, and hello, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to be here with you today and to participate in this important discussion. I'm really grateful to Amrita University and to the C20 Working Group for the chance to engage in this discussion, and also to be reconnected with longtime friends that I've learned so much from throughout my career. I was really intrigued by the title of this event, focusing on compassion. Coming from the World Bank, it's certainly not a word that we use often in our day-to-day work. We tend to talk more about GDP, distributional impacts, and things like that. In more recent years, we are seeing and talking more about the importance of social sustainability, of inclusion, of voice and agency. I'll talk a little bit about that, and even about decolonizing our minds and decolonizing aid. So I'll just keep talking while the slides are coming up, because I know we're over time. Ian's presentation talked about some of the words associated with compassion. Looking at the title of the event it also prompted me to think about the definition of compassion. So I Googled it, and as one does, and found different definitions, not all of which I liked very much. The first one I came across was the Oxford English Dictionary, which defined it as sympathetic pity and concern for the sufferings or misfortunes of others. And to me, it had a very negative, particularly the word pity has a negative connotation, almost as if you feel sorry for someone, but it's sort of, you're more glad that it's not you and you have no intention of doing anything about it. If we can go to the next slide already, please. So the definitions from other dictionaries, the Merriam-Webster and Cambridge dictionaries, were a bit better for me in terms of focusing on sympathy and accompanying that with action, or at least a desire for action to do something to help people. We can go to the next slide. I also found this in my search, which came from a website about grieving the loss of a child. And it laid out a continuum of terminology from pity to compassion, explaining the difference, importantly, between sympathy and empathy. So really caring about someone's plight, or even more so empathy, being really able to fully understand what people are experiencing and feeling, to compassion, which again focuses on reaching out and doing something about it. So I really like to focus on action, as we're in the midst of a global climate crisis and we desperately need action. And it's really important that this action be based on compassion and empathy, and on sincere, not on pity, because that will determine the nature and impact of our actions, as we heard from all the other speakers. So we could go to the next slide. The climate crisis tends to be spoken about as an environmental crisis. However, I always say that it's more of a social crisis than anything else. That's because the technical solutions to the climate crisis exist. Scientists have told us how much and by when we need to get to net zero emissions. We know what needs to happen. We know how to do it. The trickier part are the social dimensions of this, the political economy dimensions of this, and also making sure we can protect vulnerable people from the impacts, ensure equity in a greener world, and even use this as an opportunity to practice compassion and correct historical wrongs and injustices. So at a global level, poor countries have contributed very little to the climate crisis, yet they're paying the price. So wealthy countries must acknowledge their historical responsibilities and deliver on their promises of finance and technology to help poorer countries develop through a net zero pathway and help them deal with the impacts of climate change that are already being felt and that are disproportionately affecting poor and marginalized groups. Over the last decade, the poorest countries were affected by almost 8 times as many disasters than in the 1980s. And every climate shock threatens their ongoing development and the well-being of their people. And within countries, we know that, as Swamiji said, that there is no such thing as a natural disaster, that they are man-made. And so we know that it's inequality and poverty and lack of compassion that drive disasters and climate shocks, that drive the risk. So for many years now, there's been a recognition that disasters are socially constructed. They reveal pre-existing patterns of inequality and exclusion that shape vulnerability to climate change. And climate is also an issue of intergenerational justice. I'm sure many of you have heard the saying from Indigenous peoples of North America that says, we do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. So it's no wonder that we have seen growing voices of youth leaders in the movement for climate action demanding action. We borrowed quite a lot from our children, and we owe it to future generations to repair the damage done. We could go to the next slide, please. So I wanted to focus my remarks on how we then operationalize compassion in our approach to disasters and climate change. And I'll focus that in terms of the role of the World Bank, where we work, our counterparts are national governments. At the World Bank, we're now articulating and promoting a stronger focus on social sustainability, in addition to environmental sustainability and economic sustainability, but social sustainability, which is we define as when people feel a part of the development process and believe that they and their descendants will benefit from it. And in the climate space, this is very much about localizing climate action, working with communities as partners, not as beneficiaries, channeling climate finance and decision-making power to the local level. It's about listening, connecting, building trust, all the concepts that you've heard from Ian, from Maureen, from Rajiv and others. A shift that we've seen in the global climate governance over recent years is the engagement of non-state actors, of the private sector, youth leaders, grassroots women, indigenous peoples, cities. This is a really welcome shift and should be capitalized upon, as partnerships are critical to driving effective climate action. So national governments cannot and should not be expected to do this on their own. No one can do it on their own. So as we've heard, traditional knowledge and practices among local communities and indigenous peoples, for example, have a great deal to contribute to climate solutions. However, those same communities often face barriers related to limited voice and involvement in policy and decision-making processes that directly affect their livelihoods and their lives, including around climate change mitigation, adaptation, and the management of natural resources. And similarly, women are often the designers and builders of resilience at the local level. And we have a plethora of examples demonstrating the value of empowering women as a way to enhance broader resilience, including through partnerships with grassroots women's networks like the Wairo Commission, where, for example, in Central America, women started at the community level, started teaching each other around climate smart practices, and then engaged and partnered with their municipal authorities and national authorities, teaching them around climate and how to integrate it into development. And we're recognized as experts in their own right around resilience. So these things can grow and have tremendous ripple effects in terms of resilience and development. I'd like to focus on one particular example on how we are promoting locally led climate action at the scale necessary to address the climate crisis, which is by building or strengthening existing national country-led systems for devolved climate finance. So this is looking at, you've heard a lot of amazing examples of at a local level of how people help each other and practice compassion in terms of responding and recovering from shocks. I want to talk about how we, again, in our role as an actor working at the national level, how compassion can become national policy in terms of climate action. So
Margaret,
yes.
Your slide is not moved.
Yeah, I think, yeah, you can just stay here for 1 second.
Yeah, thanks.
Kenya, we've been working with the government over the past few years and have launched last year the first national scale model of devolved climate finance called Financing Locally Led Climate Action, or FLOCA for short. So this is a program that channels climate finance to county governments, while at the same time providing the technical support and capacity building to county and local governments to work in partnership with their citizens to understand and assess climate risk and identify solutions that are based on local priorities and local values and local visions of safety and resilience. So there's essentially it works as giving 2 sets of grants to counties. One is an institutional grant that they use to put everything in place that they need, their climate legislation, their teams, and also to undertake this participatory process of at the village and ward level around this assessment process and action planning process. And then that unlocks a second larger investment grant, which then funds those priorities identified by communities. So the idea here is to affect change at the micro level in the lives of communities while doing this, again, at a national scale with national governments. So there's stronger capacity to have local level priorities inform nationally determined contributions and development plans, improve reporting on how local action is feeding into national climate commitments, and also attract climate investment. This has served as a platform for bringing in other sources of international climate finance. So I think we could go to the next slide, please. So just to sort of iterate on some of the challenges this program addresses are the fact that research has shown that less than 10% of international climate finance is actually channeled to the local level. So we need to address that because the impacts are felt at local level. There is a focus on the most vulnerable counties and those most vulnerable within those counties because, as I mentioned before, it's inequality and poverty driving the level of risk and vulnerability. It has a focus on the participatory process so that local experience and traditional knowledge are not undermined or remaining invisible by outside actors. It's helping to inform national policies by realities on the ground and scale up, smaller scale efforts that are working well. And as I mentioned again, to crowd in other sources of climate finance. So we go to the last slide, I think it should be. This is, well, we don't have to spend time on this. This is just, there's a number of governments and partners who have endorsed these principles for locally led climate action, which we've embedded in the FLOCA program. And those you can find online. There's 8 of them around some of the concepts that I've discussed. So I'll leave that one just there, and then we can go to the last slide, which I think it is. Yeah, so just to say that, these approaches, we do have a commitment within the World Bank to initiate other programs like this using this approach. So that we can help the governments that we partner with translate national commitments into action on the ground. And that these partnerships, with communities really need to rely on principles of inclusion and voice, and particularly poor and vulnerable groups, to integrate them into our approaches to address the climate crisis, so that we can practice compassion in our work, but also address the crisis at the necessary scale. So thank you so much again for the invitation and for listening, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Margaret. I know that there's been some talks in the recent C20 events where the issue of democratization in various aspects of achieving sustainability, it's been discussed, but I think your slides gave a lot of food for thought in terms of taking that up systematically. I'm sure our team would love to work with you in terms of taking some of those points into our policy draft. I think we just started working on that. Maybe within the next couple of weeks or so, we'd love to reach out to you on that. Thank you so much. So Professor Vinod, I know we are a little bit behind schedule, but I think it's wonderful to see the audience still with us. I think pretty much everybody is still with us. So I think we can probably spend some time with questions and answers. And I think there's a few in the chat window. If needed, we could start with that, or we can invite from the audience.
Yeah, I think we can start with the questions in the chat. Maybe you can take up the questions in case they want to ask them themselves.
Sure.
You can also.
Okay. Okay. So the first one is from Mr. Brajesh Sinha from Agrani Bharat Abhiyan. So, Mr. Brajesh, are you there? I'm not sure if they've been permitted to unmute themselves. Otherwise, I can read out the question. It says, after the end of the G20 summit, how will we be able to stay connected with each other continuously? Because the subject of SRC and disaster management is such that there is a need to work together continuously. So I think this, Professor Vinod, perhaps you can just. Yes,
I think that's a very practical question, because a lot of effort has gone into many of the platforms. Like C20, you also have the B20, the F20, U20, and W20, and Y20, and S20, and so on. There are so many platforms, and there are so many events happening in many parts not only in India, but also in many G20 member countries. So I think there has to be a continuity. And fortunately, there is a certain continuity which is happening because Indonesia passed on the G20 presidency to India, and India is going to pass it on to Brazil, and Brazil will pass it on to South Africa. So for the first time, we have the Global South having a continuity in terms of the G20 presidency in 4 years, from 2021, 22, and 23, and 24. So we will be actually seeing that there is this continuity in terms of follow-ups, and also many of the policy briefs which have been prepared in the past have not been implemented. Many of the recommendations have not been implemented. So that is going to be a challenge for the troikas and the Sherpas of all the various platforms. And then they need to basically look at some of these unfinished agendas. And then, because it's like ABC, what is a priority which has to be done, must, should, and could. So what happens is that, if the must is not carried out, then this is a problem. So what happens is when you have the should becomes, could, and it becomes also a must. So it's actually something where there is a progression. So it becomes a priority. If we are not actually doing this, then it becomes a real priority. So like Margaret said, climate crisis is a social crisis, and we are seeing that the pandemic has actually worsened the inequality in many countries. So we really need to look at the issues of climate justice, gender justice, social justice, and intergenerational justice. These are important, and we need to really factor that in. And so that is where, the work of people like Maureen, Margaret, Praveer, and Ian Davis, and Rajiv Shah, all this becomes so important. I know that this 10-minute, 15-minute interventions are not enough. We have to really do full justice means that, you need to do a long roundtables with at least 1 hour of intervention from each of the speakers. We would need to probably devote a full day, if not more, in terms of understanding some of these issues which they have raised. So I think there is a need for continuity, and we hope that this continuity will come by creating some kind of facilitation mechanism. And this is what we are recommending to the G20 heads of states and also to the G20 groups, that the facilitation mechanism should continue, and these interactions and these recommendations from various webinars and things so that need to be consolidated into maybe white papers, into policy briefs, and these should be submitted to the heads of state. So we have a civil society summit happening on 30th and 31st of July in Jaipur. And we have a heads of states meet happening in September in New Delhi. So we see that the progression in terms of many activities, and we hope that there will be some continuity and facilitation mechanism for taking some of these things forward. And what we really need is really a lot more change agents, a lot more catalysts, and a lot more people who can actually take these ideas forward. So this locally led adaptation is very important. And what Maureen said about GRIP, in Central America, in Latin America, and the Caribbean, and Africa, and South Asia, these are all initiatives which are actually showing the empowerment of communities. I was very, very touched by that statement that, you are actually listening to a lot more in terms of, jargon without actually looking at emotions, looking at feelings, and that was mentioned in one of your slides, that we are actually ignoring emotions and feelings. And that is something which is very important. And that, I think, is community really going through shocks, one after the other, whether it is conflicts, whether it is disasters or climate change induced shocks. We need to really understand that these things, these shocks are actually something which is actually destroying that confidence. So we need to really look at compassion as a universal human value. And if climate change is actually a threat multiplier, which is actually creating more and more shocks. We need to have the people coming up as force multipliers. And we're seeing each of the persons who spoke today are force multipliers. And we feel that that is something which is very important. We need to really make change happen and also advocate for change. And that is what, Praveer, actually your work has actually shown that it is possible if we can also find allies within the stakeholder groups, within corporate sector, within government, within elected representatives, within the media, within CSOs, and within the donor agencies. And people like, Margaret in the World Bank, she talked about, the need to really look at, you mentioned about not only just decolonizing minds, but decolonizing aid. And, decolonizing also came up in Maureen's slides. So we need to really see that this is becoming important, that Global South, the vulnerability, the social protection of people, they need to really look at how can we really empower people to really move from gatherers to producers to entrepreneurs, what Praveer said. I think this is important. Sorry, I gave a very long answer. We need to continue these discussions. Yeah. Sriram.
Thank you, Professor Vinod. There is one question from Mr. Sheikh Omar Faye. He's from Gambia. He's a research scholar. And he says, I would like to know if the challenges regarding the advancement in Brazil cuts across Africa and Asia as well, based on your experience. This is to Professor Maureen.
Yes, thank you. And yes, these are cross-cutting issues. Each of our regions in GRIP have focused on something slightly different. Has a, I can't say local. We're talking about world regions here, but it has they've decided on a regional focus, but there are a number of cross-cutting themes. But if I could draw out one point, I think, that comes from some of the things that Vinod has just been elaborating there. One of the really important things that we found, what we tried to do was give money, particularly to groups who didn't normally get access to money in the way that many of us in this meeting now may have access to funding opportunities. And what we've also found is the power of local voices, the power of the voices of the people who are doing the work. So I'm just here telling you about what other people have done. Far better for them to be here telling you directly what they've done, because I can tell you in every case when they've come to London recently over several months and spoken, it's been so powerful. They don't need me standing here telling people what they've done. They do it so much more powerfully themselves. So having those opportunities for people to speak for themselves, not for others to speak on behalf of, even though I recognize that it's part of our compassion and part of our care that we do. We want to act as catalysts and facilitators and get that work out further where we have reach. But if we can open up opportunities for people to come into these kinds of forums and speak for themselves, I think it would be an even more powerful message. Thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. There is one question which is kind of like boiling the ocean, but I'll ask it anyway. It's from Mr. Rohit Maurya. And maybe this can be directed to Shri Praveer ji. So Rohit asks, how can we be so sure that our path to climate change will really work for the future? If it does not, then what is our backup plan in case Mother Earth rejects us?
You have to unmute yourself.
the question answers itself. There's no way this can not succeed, and the only way to do is through all the presentations that we made today and all the systems that we need to put in place with compassion and with a lot of empathy, compassion, and care for human dignity. And if we if we look at these issues, there is no way this is not achievable. This has to be achieved, and certainly will be achieved. Well, we need to have a plan B. Here we don't need to have a plan B, and has to succeed. And the issues that we discussed today, compassion, empathy, a lot of commitment, a lot of things that we need to do, things will change drastically if done with commitment and empathy and compassion. It's just not a project, but it then becomes a goal, a goal for lifetimes. And if all of us get together and the rest of them work together, there is no way this is not achievable. There has to be. This better be.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So, Vaishak or Shivan, do the audience members have the access to ask their questions via audio or?
Sir, we can allow them to talk. I see one hand up, so I can permit that.
We can go ahead with that. Asha?
Yep, I've enabled the microphone.
Okay, yeah. Asha, if you could unmute, okay. Thank you. Please go ahead, Asha.
You can unmute the video also.
Currently, they are only allowed microphone access. So
okay,
no problem.
Fine. Yeah.
Asha ji, please go ahead.
Asha, you have been unmuted. You can speak. You can raise your question. Yeah, we can hear you.
Hello.
Yeah,
yes.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Asha Vernekar. I'm from Goa, and recently I had attended the function at Gangtok on climate change, and it was a very nice experience that we all came together and we discussed so many issues and so many solutions. So here Goa also, because it is a coastal belt and we face a lot of, as of now things are fine, but the way things are going on, in future we can face a lot of problems, and there is a need to save the wetlands here in Goa. And as the sea level is rising, and because of the garbage and waste management problem, so we as NGO want to do, and we need your support here in Goa.
Can you mention the name of your NGO?
Goa Livelihoods Forum.
Goa Livelihoods Forum. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. If you send an
like
email.
to do something, yeah, we would like to do regarding climate change. We would like to work on climate change, and if we can be supported.
Okay, actually, there are many civil society organizations working on climate change in many states and union territories in the country, in India, and also in other G20 member countries. So once we know what your specific requirements are, we will try and also connect you with other organizations and also the state government's disaster management authority and also the climate change authority. The organizations which can support.
It will be really nice if that can happen.
Yeah.
And we are here in Goa, and not many NGOs are there working on climate change.
Please send us an email. We can actually put the email. We can get an email from you, and then we can follow it up.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you. It was a lovely discussion here.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, very fruitful.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think we have one question from Angela. Her hand is raised. So Dr. Shivan, can we unmute her?
Yes, I have given them talking permission.
Thank you.
Angela, you can now unmute your microphone.
Angela, please go ahead.
Meanwhile, there's another person, Ray.
I can now, okay, thank you. Now I'm muted. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Please. Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, my name is Angela from Africa, Kenya. I work for an organization called Global Climate Change Action. And we are in the process of trying to get partnerships and as well as support to enable us curb the climate change in Africa, starting from Kenya. We have been, we are a team of less than 20, and we have been making contributions and visiting groups and organizations and functions and trying to plant as many trees as we can. We have several proposals which we are looking for organizations that can support us, and we would like your help. How do we go about that?
Yeah, Angela, actually, we have been discussing with a few organizations in Kenya, which have been working on climate change adaptation issues. And we have signed MOUs with two organizations. One is Team Environment Kenya, which is actually working on some of the concerns. There are also another group which is working on a Million Trees campaign. Like there is a Billion Trees campaign in Mongolia, which is a presidential directive from the president of Mongolia, which is trying to look at the challenge of desertification, and also, in sub-zero temperatures, there's a need for more and more biomass to be created. So there is a Billion Trees campaign in Mongolia, and in Kenya there is a Million Trees campaign. Team Environment Kenya is there. Then there's also a Global Peace Foundation, which is a partner organizations in Kenya. And there was also a question from Global Climate Change Action about ASAL areas and what can be done. I think he's one of your members, which has asked a question, and we have responded to that also. We would like to know more. Please send us an email, and then we will try and connect with local organizations, and then try and see that you'll be able to work with more partner organizations.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Anybody else would like to speak? Yeah, Ray.
There's some hands raised, but there's also questions posted in the chat window. Perhaps I can just read it. There's one.
I think Ray.
Yeah,
Ray,
yes.
yeah, please go ahead.
Ray,
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very good evening. And Professor Vinod, thank you so much for bringing all the luminaries in the sector. And it's wonderful to hear back Maureen, Margaret, Panvirji, and also Ian Davis, Professor, and Raju, all old friends. I have only one question. I am personally doing also climate change and next gen leaders research, and I hope to finish it next March. Now, one question that is mind boggling all the time. Whenever commitments are made, we are supposed to have 100 billion commitment to climate action, and it's never complete. And also the example that Margaret provided us about local action. What is one mechanism that would make mandatory both to the governments in NDCs as well as the donor policies that local action is mandatory? What is that one mechanism we can propose?
Margaret, I think you should try and respond.
Well, it's interesting. I'm in Bangkok currently at the Community-Based Adaptation Global Conference, and we've been talking about that. I don't know if we can make it mandatory, but some of the things we have been talking about is seeing if we can something into the these discussions around a global adaptation goal, just like we have the 1.5 degrees for the global mitigation goal to stay under 1.5. There's an agreement to develop a global adaptation goal, but that is not determined yet. So we've been exploring ideas here. We can embed locally led adaptation into that goal. On the other hand, we're working to get more countries and partners to endorse the principles on locally led adaptation, and seeing how we can, not make it mandatory, but convince governments, convince partners to use this approach. So we're trying to attack it from all sides.
Yes, I think, the platforms like G20 and G7 and G77 and so on would need to really also make the world leaders listen to certain commitments which need to be made. Because the UN Secretary General has also been saying climate change is actually code red for humanity, and also mentioning that we need to really look at the climate change as a climate emergency. So we really need to really do whatever is possible now, because intergenerational justice is also important. We have to really look at sustainable development, a development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. So we should not be neglecting water level aquifers and the water level dropping. We should not be ignoring the heat waves. We should not be ignoring the problems of communities which are actually living on minimum survival by doing wage labor, and also trying to look at non-timber forest produce and gathering those kind of essential survival strategies. I think we need to really bring some of these things into the forefront of the agenda, and that is where policy really has to be powerful. We have to make this issue as a rights-based approach, as something where you honor the rights and entitlements of communities at risk from climate change, and I think that becomes really important. And that is where all stakeholder groups need to come together: academia, donor agencies, governments, elected representatives, media, multidisciplinary professionals. A lot more of powerful crowdsourced feedback to elected representatives and world leaders, I think, should actually be coming forward. Yes, any other comments? Shall
we take one last question? I think Mr.
Hello.
Yes.
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, sir. My question is that
can you introduce yourself?
Sir, my name is Rohit Moore, and I'm from Agra, Uttar Pradesh, India. And I am a civil engineer and a geo-environmental engineer and a professional engineer in the civil engineering department in Hindustan College. So, sir, my question is that how can we be so sure that our path of climate change and resilience will really work for the future? And if not, then what is the backup plan in case of Earth as a living creature reject us? Because it is constantly giving us hints about rejecting us humans. So what is the backup plan if everything about we are working for is not work in the future?
Yeah, Mr. Praveer has actually responded to that. Maybe you can unmute and unmute. Yes.
But this is there's no question of this not success. So many huge strides have been made already, and with the entire world community coming together and taking these challenges, I can see no reason why this will not be achieved. And in fact, the way it's being handled and the way awareness generation, the way it's being taken to every nook and corner, not only of the country but around the world. I don't think I have very few doubts why it will not succeed. So I don't know what, but work hard. The question is, we need to continue to do these dialogues. Similar dialogues are happening all around the world. Experts, multidisciplinary bureaucrats, political leaders, others, academia is all coming together. And there would be a few dissenting voices. And for any good program, you have a few dissenting voices here and there, a few naysayers and a few doubting Thomases. But that should not lessen our resolution or the absolute commitment to do this and achieve it. So, Rohit, you're an engineer and working in a college. So continue to work in this direction also and create awareness in your students.
Yes, sir,
Everywhere
definitely, sir.
you go.
I'm doing it. I'm also doing PhD in the work of landfill design for protecting the waste management system.
So whichever area you're working, take this message forward. And I am sure with the global village coming together and with all this technology and rest of it and all these wonderful best practices coming, there is very little for us to see that this will not succeed. It has to succeed and will.
Yes, sir. I also hope so.
Yes, that's wonderful.
I think there are no more further questions. We can try and wrap it up. Dr. Sriram?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I think we have overshot considerably. So I want to express my heartfelt gratitude to the esteemed speakers from today's session. First, my gratitude to Sampujya Swami Amrita Swarupanandaji for his wonderful words on the idea of compassion as a foundation for all that we do. And Sri Praveer Krishnaji, thank you so much. You've really spared a lot of time for our session. And it's really wonderful that all of you have stayed till the very end, and we've overshot by about 40 minutes. So gratitude to all of you. Professor Maureen, Ms. Margaret Arnold, and Professor Ian Davis. I'm not sure if he's on the call right now. And Professor Vinod Menon for being the cohesive force in bringing everything together, and the organizing team, of course, and all the others who are part of taking the notes and including everything into the policy draft and so on. So I'm sure the team will reach out to all of you. There are some wonderful opportunities I see here. And Ms. Margaret, today you had mentioned about the idea that this topic was a bit intriguing to you. It's not something that's usual in the information that you receive. So I'm just thinking, how do we make it usual? How do we make it common? That we bring in the idea of compassion into all our narratives. So I do hope that we can collectively achieve this in a very, very short time. And maybe in the next presidency for G20, that it would be a default element in all its discussions. So thank you once again. And I hope that this association continues with Amrita and with all the speakers of today and their organizations. And I want to thank the audience that stayed so patiently till the very end and made this wonderful interactive event as well. Thank you all, and have a blessed day and evening.
Yeah, may I request that all the questions in the Q&A box be copied, and also any comments on the chat, please kindly copy them, and then you can mail them so that we will be able to at least know who are the people who are asking questions in case we have not been able to take up these questions.
Sure, sure.
I also wanted to leave a lasting thought, actually, because in a few of the presentations and observations, the word pity came in. I think compassion should be seen as different from pity. The people need to be, respected, that, a life with dignity is a right. And we should not confuse that with pity or charity. That is very different. And we need to look at compassion, because, the slide which Ian showed also talked about, the people giving toys to, the victims of the earthquake in Turkey. We have also seen a lot of diversions of expired pharmaceuticals which are sent to disaster victims to just clear the inventory, because it is lying in a warehouse, and so these are expired, and so you need to basically push it out. And so we have seen that many people use unethical practices, and this should not be misunderstood and seen as compassion. We need to see what is actually given to people, also with respect and with dignity, because they are all human beings. And that is something which we need to really look at it. And that is where compassion really becomes a human value. So I hope that we will actually be able to take that message forward, because people need to be respected as human beings. And we need to really see that compassion really becomes a social capital of communities, which we can actually really build on.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, all of you, for joining, and then also for sharing your thoughts. We really appreciate and value you for the time which you have taken and the time which you have spent with us. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sriram.
Thank you very
Margaret,
much.
did you wish to say something?
Margaret, you want to say something?
No, just thank you to everyone. It was really a pleasure to participate in the conversation.
Maureen, Praveen.
Yes, thank you very much. This was wonderful and extremely enlightening.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Staying connected. Thank you. Thank you.
Connected.
Have a nice day. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.